In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
Nearly 400 years ago, a great many of the people in England were very unhappy because the king would not let them pray to God as they liked. The king said they must use the same prayers that he did. And if they would not do this, they were often thrown into prison or perhaps driven away from home. "Let us go away from this country," said unhappy Englishmen to each other, and so they left their homes and they went far off to a country called Holland. And it was about this time that they began calling themselves pilgrims. Pilgrims, you know, are people who are always traveling to find something they love or to find a land where they can be happier. And these Englishmen and women were journeying, they said, from place to place towards heaven, their dearest country. In Holland, the pilgrims were quiet and happy for a while, but they were very poor. And when their children began to grow up, they were not like English children, but talked Dutch, like the little ones of Holland. And some grew naughty and did not want to go to church anymore. "This will never do," said the Pilgrim fathers and mothers. So after much talking and thinking and writing, they made up their minds to come here to America. They hired 2 vessels called the Mayflower and the Speedwell to take them across to the sea. But the Speedwell was not a strong ship, and the captain had to take her home again before she had gone very far. The Mayflower went back too. Part of the Speedwell's passengers were given to her, and then they started alone across the great ocean. There were 100 people on board, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and little children. They were very crowded, and it was cold and uncomfortable. The sea was rough and pitched the Mayflower about. And they were 2 months sailing over the water. And the children cried many times on the journey and wished that they had never come to the tiresome ship that rocked them so hard. It would not let them keep still a minute. But they had one pretty plaything to amuse them, for in the middle of the great ocean, a pilgrim baby was born. And they called him Oceanus for his birthplace. When the children grew so tired that they were cross and fretful, Oceanus's mother let them come in and play with him. And they always brought smiles and happy faces back again. At last, the Mayflower came into sight of land, but if the children had been thinking of grass and flowers and birds, they must have been very much disappointed, for the month was cold November. And there was nothing to be seen but rocks and sand and the hard, bare ground. Some of the Pilgrim Fathers, with the brave Captain Miles Standish at their head, went on to shore to see if they could find any houses or white people. But they only saw some Indians who ran away from them. And they found some Indian huts and some corn buried in holes in the ground, and they went to and fro from the ship 3 times till by the end they found a pretty place to live. And there were fields and little running brooks. Then at last the tired pilgrims landed from the ship on a spot we call Plymouth Rock. And the first house was begun on Christmas Day, but when I tell you how sick they were and how much they suffered that first winter, you will be very sad and sorry for them. The weather was cold, and the snow fell fast and thick, and the wind was icy, and the Pilgrim Fathers had no one to help them cut down the trees to build their church and their houses. The Pilgrim mothers helped all they could, but they were tired of the long journey and the cold and hungry too, for no one had the right kind of food to eat, nor even enough of it. So the first one was taken sick, and then another, until half of them were in bed at the same time. Brave Miles Standish and other soldiers nursed them as well as they knew how. But before spring came, half of the people died and had gone at last to heaven, their dearest country. But by and by the sun shone more brightly, and the snow melted, and the leaves began to grow, and sweet spring had come. Some friendly Indians had visited the Pilgrims during the winter, and Captain Miles Standish, they forgot to call him Brave here, but the brave Captain Miles Standish and several of his men had returned the visit. One of the kind Indians was called Squanto, and he came to stay with the Pilgrims and showed them how to plant their corn and their peas and their wheat and their barley. When the summer came and these days were long and bright, the Pilgrim children were very happy, and they thought Plymouth was a lovely place indeed. All kinds of beautiful wildflowers grew at their doors. There were hundreds of birds and butterflies, and great pines and woods were always cool and shady when the sun was too bright. When it was autumn, the fathers gathered the barley and the wheat and the corn that they had planted, and found that it had grown so well that they would have quite enough for the long winter that was coming. "Let us thank God for it all," they said. "It is he who made the sunshine and the rain fall and the corn grow." And they thanked God in their homes and with their little church, and the fathers and the mothers and the children thanked him. "Then," said the Pilgrim mothers, "let us have a great Thanksgiving party and invite the friendly Indians and all rejoice together." So they had the first Thanksgiving party. It was a grand one. 4 men went out shooting one whole day and brought back so many wild ducks and geese, the great wild turkeys, that there was almost enough for a week. And there was deer meat also, of course, for there were plenty of deer in the forest. And the Pilgrim mothers made the corn and wheat into bread and cakes, and they had fish and clams from the sea besides. The friendly Indians came with their chief, Massawat. Everyone came that was invited, and more, I dare say, for there were 90 of them altogether, and they brought 5 deer with them, and they gave to the Pilgrims, and they must have liked the party very much, because they stayed for 3 days. And the Indians you would have been very much frightened if you had seen them. And the baby Oceanus, who was only a year old, began to cry at first whenever they came near him. And they were dressed in deer skins, and some of them had a furry coat of a wild cat hanging on their arms, and long black hair fell loose on their shoulders and was trimmed with feathers or fox tails. And they had their faces painted with all kinds of strange ways, some black stripes as broad as your finger all the way up and down them. But whatever they wore, it was their very best, and they had put it on for this Thanksgiving party. Each meal before they ate anything, the Pilgrims and the Indians thanked God together for all his goodness. And the Indians sang and danced in the evenings, and every day they ran races and played all kinds of games with the children. Then sometimes the Pilgrims with their guns and the Indians with their bows and arrows would see who could shoot the farthest and the best. So they were glad and merry and thankful for 3 whole days. And the Pilgrim mothers and fathers had been sick and sad many times since they landed from the Mayflower, and they worked very hard often and had not enough to eat. And they were mournful indeed when their friends had died and left them. But now they tried to forget all of this and think only of how good God had been to them. And so they were all happy together at the first Thanksgiving party. All this happened nearly 400 years ago, and ever since that time, Thanksgiving has been kept in our country. Every year, our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers have rejoiced together like the Pilgrims and had something to eat and be thankful for each time. And every year, some father told the story of the brave pilgrims to his little sons and daughters and taught them to be very glad and proud that the Mayflower came sailing to our country so many years ago. So all of this is from a story called The First Thanksgiving by Nora Smith. Oh, God. All right, let's get into this one.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey, welcome to greetings and welcome to the American Sermon. I will be your governor of the colony for this evening, and my name is John Towers. Ooh, sorry about that. Thank you so much for tuning in. As you know, the American Sermon is a spinoff of my regular podcast called the Abracast. You can find it wherever you find your podcasts. I guarantee it. And yeah, it's a trip, man. It's a trip. Okay, so the American Sermon is a podcast where we look at some of the weird, offbeat, and sometimes sinister things mixed in to the foundation of the United States. And tonight we have a barn burner. The cold open was a pretty vanilla, standard elementary school version of the first Thanksgiving. And it's about as inaccurate as possible, at least when it gets to the, Thanksgiving party. But not in the way that you might think. In America, as kids get older, the story of the first Thanksgiving gets darker and darker until they get to college and are taught, the Pilgrims came over with assault rifles and grenades filled with anthrax and murdered the Native Americans. Again, not true. The story of the first, we're actually going to find out, is actually the story of the third Thanksgiving is a harrowing one. Much like most of the topics we have touched so far on the sermon, it might be a little edgy for those listeners out there who are overly sensitive. So this should serve as your trigger warning for the evening. If you crave a safe space, you will not find it here, my friends. I suggest you go read the introduction to Thomas Paine's Age of Reason, and if that doesn't help you, turn on NPR, I guess. Because as we will see, as anyone who has ever seen when they are confronted with this true story of Thanksgiving, the bullshit is deep. One can find hundreds, if not thousands, of articles about the lunatic Republican myth of Thanksgiving. But tonight, we are not concerned with Republicans or Democrats. And tonight, we are not reading from these articles. Tonight, we are reading from an old book. An old book that was written by the governor of the Plymouth colony himself, William Bradford. He wrote a giant book. Tonight, this is the featured book for tonight. And it was written just a few years after the events themselves took place. So it's called The History of the Plymouth Plantation, William Bradford. It was published in 1650. So let us look at the plight of these Puritans and the lesson it holds. And as we get into this, let us strive to remember this lesson even as it fades from our modern memory. And let us always remember and shout to the hilltops and rant to anyone who will listen, even if for a moment, that Joseph McCarthy was right. Are you ready? Let's get started. So, the Pilgrims had a lot of problems. They had problems with their boats. They had problems with the king. They had problems with the English. They had fucking problems with Holland. They had problems with the sailors on their boat. They had problems with each other, and they had problems with Mother Nature. They arrived at the wrong place. They were aiming for Virginia, but instead they landed at Cape Cod, November 11th, 1620. They started exploring the area and sort of looking for a place to set up camp, and they ran into some of these Native Americans who ran away from them. And well, let's just get to the book. Let's start in this book. Okay. Where? Okay. So there went some 30 men, but found to be no harbor for ships, but only for boats. And there was also found 2 of their houses covered with mats and the sundry of their implements in them. But the people were run away and could not be seen. Also, there was found more of their corn and of their beans of various colors. The corn and the beans they brought away, purposing to give them full satisfaction when they should meet with any of them, as about some 6 months afterwards they did to their good content. Okay, I don't feel like I need to translate this because literally it's all written like this. But just for the sake of it, here we go. They happened upon some belongings of the Native Americans and they stole corn and beans from them. Bradford says here, this is the part that they don't teach anybody. There's just, the fucking Pilgrims, the first thing they did is stole food. And sure, that is what they did, right? And I'm not apologizing for the Pilgrims, but Bradford here said that it was their full intention to give them payment of some kind for them when they should meet up with these Indians. Here is to be noted a special providence of God and a great mercy to his poor people, that here they got seed to plant them corn for the next year, or else they might have starved. And they had done nothing in any likelihood to get any till the season had been passed, as the sequel did manifest. Neither is it likely that they had this, if the first voyage had not been made, for the ground was now all covered with snow and hard frozen. But the Lord is never wanting unto his and their greatest needs, and let his holy name have all of the praise. So Bradford is identifying them being able to steal this corn and these beans or whatever as the providence, as God, is a miracle. Look, they found this stuff, right? So we're going to move ahead and we're going to talk about the Mayflower Compact. Because something very important is in this compact. Yeah, okay. In the beginning, with a combination of made by them before they came ashore. Okay, so he's saying that while they were still on the boat, they did this, being the first foundation of their government in this place. Occasioned partly by the discontented and mutinous speeches, and that some of the strangers amongst them had let fall from them in the ship. He had shit talkers in his midst. That when they came ashore, they would use their own liberty, for none had the power to command them, and the patent they had being for Virginia and not for New England, which belonged to another government, with which the Virginia Company had nothing to do. And partly that such an act done by them in their condition considered might be affirmed as any patent in some respects more sure. So he's saying, remember, I mentioned that they were aiming for Virginia, and they wound up further north, and they realized where they were, and they realized that their charter with the Virginia Company, or whatever it was called, was fucked. And they made the decision to stay where they were, where they landed, and not travel further to Virginia. And so what he's saying is these guys with this mutinous speech that had fallen out of them, these discontented people were like, they made the Pilgrims nervous, because they were like, we're not landing in Virginia. The agreement we have with the people that we have the contract for doesn't mean anything. So, no rules apply to us. So they were like, okay, fuckers, let's sit down and let's hammer this out. We're creating a government now. The form was as followeth: in the name of God, amen. You notice all these Puritans and these Pilgrims and stuff, they don't talk about Jesus. They're like Gentile Jews. It's pretty interesting when you pick it up. We whose name are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread and sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God and of Great Britain, France, Ireland, King, defender of the faith, etc. Having undertaken the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith in honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by the present solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant. And here we go. This is the important part. Covenant, and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, and for better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the end aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such and equal laws, ordinance, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time shall be, though most met and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. The good of the colony, and we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness thereof, we have hereunder subscribed the names at Cape Cod on the 11th of November, in the year of the reign of our sovereign Lord King James of England, France, Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland in the 44th, Anno Domini 1620. After this, they chose, or rather confirmed, Mr. John Carver, a man godly and well approved amongst them, their governor for that year. And after they had provided a place for their goods, a common store, which were long and unlading for want of boats, foulness of the winter weather, and sickness of the divers, and begun some small cottages for their habitations as time would admit. And they met and consulted the laws and the orders in both of the civil and military government, as the necessity of their condition did require, still adding thereunto as urgent occasion, and several times as cases did not require. Okay, so let's take a look back at this much ballyhooed Mayflower Compact. There's some things that jump out in here and just should send a red flag up. They're going to, there's a covenant, and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid. And then this whole bit down here, upon for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. The common good. Here's what it is. back to the book. In these hard and difficult beginnings, they found some discontents and murmurings arise from some in the mutinous speeches and carriages and others. And they were soon quelled and overcome by the wisdom, patience, and just and equal carriage of things by the governor and better part, which clave faithfully together in the main. All right, so Deacon Carver, in April of the next year, he dies. He falls into a coma and he fucking dies. And our man here, the guy who's writing this book, William Bradford, he's chosen to become the governor. So William Bradford's the governor now. And we're moving into 1621. So they somehow survived their first winter by, the way of, I guess, stealing, scavenging, hard scrabble, hunting. So we're moving into the first harvest of 1621. So this is their first harvest, 1621. They began now to gather in the small harvest they had and to fit up their house and dwellings against the winter, being all well recovered in health and strength. And they had all things in good and plenty. And for some were thus employed in affairs abroad, others were exercised in fishing about cod and bass and other fish, of which they took good store, of which every family had their portion. All the summer there was no want, and now began to come in the store of fowl as winter approached, of which this place did abound when they came first, but afterwards decreased by degrees. And besides waterfowl, there were a great store of wild turkeys, of which they took many, besides venison, etc. Besides, they had about a peck a meal a week to a person, or now since the harvest in the Indian corn to the proportion which made many afterwards write so largely of their plenty to their friends in England, which were not feigned but true report. So everything seems like it's going good for them at first. So this is their first harvest, and you could read in here they're saying everyone had their portion. So this is them. All the work they're doing is going to a common store and getting divided out for everyone. Everyone gets a portion. We are wading into the crux of the whole thing now, the whole point of this episode. But I need to just say in advance that I'm about to switch the order of two things in the book. Actually, hold on. Not yet, I'm not. First, we're going to do this.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list.
Now we're wading into the crux of the whole thing. Now we're getting to the point of the whole episode, but I need just to say in advance, I'm switching the order of two things in this upcoming section of the book. I'm not altering the text at all. And the context will actually remain unchanged. I am simply going to read this in chronological order rather than the order it was written. Bradford here talks about a problem that they have and then a solution. But when he writes about it in the book, he talks about the solution first, which is fine. It's just as confusing when you're listening to someone talk about it, I think. But I'm just making it easier to making it easier to convey and to understand. I'm just defending myself from any knuckleheads out there who are going to say that I edited the text. I'm just going to state the problem first, the problem that they had, and then I'm going to state how they fixed it. So, between 1621, the first harvest, and we're going to jump to 1623. in a section that he calls private and communal farming. So remember, if you double check me, I love when you guys do double check me. So when you guys double check me on this and you were like, oh, this sneaky son of a bitch changed the text. I'm just trying to, full disclosure, I didn't change the text. I just rearranged the paragraphs so they made a little bit more sense when I'm reading them. Okay, so we're jumping to 1623. So the first harvest was 1621. 1622 happened, and the experience that we had in this common course and condition tried sundry years and amongst godly and sober men. Hold on, I gotta may well evince the vanity of the conceit of Plato and other ancients applauded by some of the later times. They had, and that had the taking away of property and bringing into the community, into a commonwealth, would make them happy and flourishing. He's talking about the idea of utopia, as if they were wiser than God. For this community, so far as it was found to breed much confusion and discontent and retard much employment, and would have been to their benefit and comfort for the young men that were most able and fit for labor and service, did repine that they should spend their time and their strength to work for other men's wives and children without any recompense. The strong or man parts had none, or had no more in division of victuals and clothing than he that was weak and not able to do a quarter of their other could. Okay, so again, I don't feel like I need to decode this. I mean, he's speaking English, but what he's saying, but I'm going to do it anyways. What he's saying is that the young men who did the most work realized that they were doing more work than other people. They were doing more work than the pilgrim mothers or the wives were, cooking dinner or whatever. They were working, they were digging, they were building, they were doing more work than the older men. We'll just say the older men weren't digging as fast or as deep or building as high or as quickly. And they're like, hey, I'm getting the same bullshit share as everybody else, and we're doing the most fucking work. And they get pissed about it. And I'm familiar with this. I'm actually very familiar with this from my army days. That's why it's good to be an E4, bros. Okay, anyhow. Yeah, okay, so they weren't getting more clothes, they weren't getting any more food, and they were doing more of the work. With the meaner and younger sort, although it was some indignity and disrespect unto them, and for the men's wives to be commanded to do service for other men, as dressing their meat, washing their clothes, etc. They determined it was a kind of slavery. Neither could many husbands well brook it, upon the point all being to have alike, and all to do alike. They thought themselves in the like condition, and one as good as another. And so, if I did not cut off those relations that God hath set amongst men, yet it did not much diminish and take off the mutual respect that should be preserved amongst them. And would it have been worse if they would have been men of another condition? Let none object that this man's corruption, and nothing to the course itself. I answer, seeing all men having this corruption in them, and God in his wisdom saw another course fitter for them. So he's saying, like, hey, if we weren't such God-fearing men, this we would have killed each other. Like, this would have destroyed us. But then he's also saying, God in his wisdom gave us another path, right? The Pilgrims for the first year scavenged and stole probably and suffered for the first year. And then according to their plan, the second 2 years, they had this commune-like farm. Everyone did everything for everybody at varying degrees of skill and ability. And, well, if you look at this historically for any amount of time, the outcome is hilariously predictable. So now these guys are like, yo, homie, how are we going to fix this stuff? We need these motherfuckers to plant more corn in a top-down socialist paradise like this. The leaders would have just said, tell the motherfuckers to plant more corn. But Bradford and his guys understood there needed to be a paradigm shift. The system wasn't broken. The system did not need a tweak. This is the one and only time I'm going to say this in this episode. I swear to God. But right now I have to say it. You have to please indulge me for just a moment. Socialism doesn't work, okay? Back to the book. All the while, no supply was heard of. This is the part that came first in the original text. And I can't understand why it's first, but anyhow, all the while, no supply was heard of. Neither knew, God damn it, this writing, neither knew they when they expect any. So they began to think of how they might raise as much corn as they could and obtain a better crop than they had done. And they might not still thus languish in misery. At length, after much debate of things, the governor, with the advice of the chiefest among them, gave way that they should set corn, every man for his own particular. See, if you grow it, you get to keep it. And that in regard trust to themselves, in all things to go on in the general way as before. So assigned to every family parcel of land. So instead of all working the same land, he's like, yo, the Smith family, you guys get this property over here. Raise as much corn as you can do. It's all yours. The Wilson family, this area now is yours. You get your own farm. You do your shit you just do as much as you can. Whatever you get to keep. So they're moving away from this commune idea to what? To what is it? To supply side economics. And they're like, here, this land is yours. Grow as much as you want, and when you grow it, you get to keep it. This was before taxes. Okay, so assigned to every family a parcel of land according to the proportion of their number. So that makes sense. If you have a family of 4 versus a family of 8, they don't get the same size plot to work on. Does that make sense to you? I know there's some of you out there that's like, no, they should have the same size. You understand? I'm going to explain later. Okay. I'm going to explain incentive later. For that end, only for the present use, but made no division for inheritance. That's also important. And they ranged all boys and youth under some family. So if there were young men that weren't married, they got assigned, they got employed. You know what I mean? They got employed by a family. And this had a very good success, for it made all hands, guess what, very industrious. So as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been by any means the governor or any other could use, and saved him a great deal of trouble. And guess what? Gave far better content. The women now went willingly into the field. They took their little ones and with them, and they made corn, which before would allege weakness and inability. So they're like, the women used to say that they were frail or whatever, and like they didn't feel like picking the corn. It was men's work, or maybe that's what they said. I don't fucking know. It's not in the text. He says they would allege weakness. To me, that means that they would they would make excuses for not going and picking corn because their incentive was taken from them. They would allege weakness and inability, whom to have compelled would have been thought the great tyranny and oppression. So just as the commune outcome was laughably predictable, the free market and personal responsibility and individual's outcome was also predictable. It was successful, and the colony had abundant food stores. And in 1623, 3 years after landing, two failed harvests, the first harvest was okay, I guess, and then 1622, it seems like it was shitty. So 3 years after landing, Governor William Bradford made the first Thanksgiving proclamation. And watch out now, for those of us who have the picture, like in the cold open, in their minds of pilgrims and Indians hanging out together, having a big feast, there is a little, you might call it cultural insensitivity here. Bradford, okay, quote, this is from the legitimately Thanksgiving proclamation. It's got a date in it, but it's 1623. So everyone out there that's catching themselves on fire talking about, no, the first Thanksgiving was when the Indians came with the deers and they partied for 3 days. That was the first Thanksgiving. Negative, Ghost Rider, the pattern's full. This is the first Thanksgiving. Quote, inasmuch as and listen to what he is giving thanks for here, or what he's praising. He's not praising the Indians or the Native Americans for helping him. Inasmuch as the Great Father has given us this year an abundant harvest of Indian corn, wheat, peas, beans, squash, and garden vegetables, and has made the forest abound with game and sea with fish and clams, inasmuch as he protected us from the ravages of the savages, has spared us from pestilence and disease, and has granted us freedom to worship God according to the dictates of our own consciousness. Now I, your magistrate, do proclaim that all ye pilgrims with your wives and ye little ones do gather at ye meeting house on ye hill between the hours of 9 and 12 in the daytime on Thursday, November 29th, in the year of our Lord 1623. And in the third year since ye pilgrims landed on ye pilgrim rock, there to listen to ye pastor and render thanksgiving to ye Almighty God for his blessings. William Bradford, ye governor of ye colony. So I'm sure there's going to be people out there that are like, I'm letting the pilgrims off the hook for some dastardly deed, or I'm overlooking the Native Americans' role in the survival of the pilgrims. And I'm telling you that I'm not doing either of those things. I'm reading to you from the text of what was done and what was said. And yes, the Native Americans did save them, I would imagine, and did join them in their little feast there, and did contribute, and they did play games and hang out and have fun. I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm saying that when we talk about Thanksgiving, that is not what we're talking about. I'm saying that William Bradford and the Pilgrims and the people at Plymouth Rock, when they gave Thanksgiving, they were thanking the free market. They were thanking God for letting them, however you want to say it. They were thanking getting away from socialism. The Pilgrims had learned a lesson that everyone learns when trying communism. On paper, And in theory, it promises posterity and equality and security. But what it delivers is poverty, misery, and notably absent from the Pilgrims' experience, but applicable everywhere else, tyranny. You might be able to argue that Bradford not being a tyrant was perhaps one of the saving graces of these pilgrims. So I mentioned incentives earlier, when the people that can work harder or work smarter or be innovative doesn't get anything for their extra effort. You're sucking the incentive away. So I went and I found this guy, Professor Mark J. Perry. He wrote an essay way back in 1955, but that is not right. It's 1995. He's a professor, and he wrote Why Socialism Failed, I believe, in 1995. I believe there's a typo in my notes. So he says socialism does not work because it is not consistent with the fundamental principles of human behavior. The failure of socialism in countries around the world can be traced to one critical defect. It is a system that ignores incentives. So I'm going to get to that later. In a capitalist economy, incentives are of the utmost importance. Market prices, the profit and loss system of accounting, the private property rights provide efficient, interrelated systems of incentives to guide and direct economic behavior. Capitalism is based on the theory that incentives matter. That's why people work overtime. That's why people go and pick up a few hours at a part-time job every now and again to get something that they want. Or to pay off credit cards because they didn't have the patience for that. I don't know. Under socialism, incentives either play a minimum role or are ignored totally. Essentially, planned economy without market prices or profits where property is owned by the state is a system without an effective incentive mechanism to direct economic activity. By failing to emphasize incentives, socialism is a theory inconsistent with human nature and is therefore doomed to fail. Socialism is based on the theory that incentives do not matter. They have to ignore it. They have to ignore it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. In terms of the Pilgrims, in their terms, these pilgrims were dealing with, why should I work harder on the crops or building a cabin or whatever, spend extra time in the field when I or my family doesn't personally benefit from it? So if you guys can, if you are butting heads with me right now, try instead of, I don't know how to do this. Try putting yourself in this position. You know, it's easy to say, yeah, I see the benefit. Hey, you know, I've watched Wrath-A-Con a bunch of times, and I do know that the good of the few outweigh the good of the good of the many outweigh the good of the few. And, so I know when I'm younger, I should work harder to help. And then when I'm older, I am able to slack off a little bit, we'll just say. When I can't produce as much, or when my talents move to another sort of speciality. And, you know, that's why we have children, is to, you know, come up and be young when we're old. It's easy to think like that. But when you're like, okay, boys, we have to dig. Okay, boys, here, this is a real life fucking thing. All right, boys, we have to stretch this concertina wire fence, you know, 5 clicks. We have to cut off this whole valley with this concertina wire fence. And then when we're done stretching the fence, we have to go and we got to do a drill and we got to lay down a minefield through this whole valley, tie it into the terrain features. You know, that's a lot of fucking work. That is a lot of work. So just scale it back. Get rid of the minefield, get rid of the concertina wire. But just imagine that you have to put a fence in around your plantation or whatever, around your colony. And you have a bunch of young men out there. You got to like dig the fucking post holes. You got to fucking pound the fucking posts in the ground. You got to hang the fucking fence parts up. That's a lot of fucking work. And it's a huge area you got to do it to. And you look around and all you see are young fucking guys doing this. Guys like, hey, I'm going to take a piss break. I'm going to walk back to this cabin and take a leak and say hi to my wife. And you go back there and there's some dudes that are like, they're sitting around playing, I don't want to say playing cards. They're sitting around doing something way less stressful. And at the end of the day, when they're giving out foods or what do they call them here, vitricles or clothing, everybody gets the same amount of shit. Like, that is stressful. It's making my blood pressure raise, if you can't tell. I'm getting very agitated about this. Oh, and essentially I'm just sitting here arguing with myself. I'm in an empty room arguing with myself. Oh, boy. Where was I? Okay, so Bradford and his guys rightfully identified that the commune system that they were all suffering under had a failure to foster, promote, and nurture the potential of the people. You know, it's funny, in the Abercast, we always talk about potential because we talk a lot about like magic and shit. And it always boils down to potentiality. So it's funny that it pops up here. They promote and nurture the potential of the people through these incentives. These pilgrims were crushed. Working the way that they were working killed their human spirit. Professor Perry says, centrally planned economies deprive the human spirit of full development. And I would add that it also retards innovation. Work smarter, not harder. You know what I'm saying? He ends his essay written in, okay, it was 1995. I got it right in my second reference. 1995. And it's almost shocking today when you consider that a Harris poll just came out stating that 49% of young Americans would prefer to live in a socialist country. Anyhow, I'm not going to get caught up on that. I'm not going to get on a millennial tirade. However, Professor Perry ends, capitalism will play a major role in the global revival of liberty and prosperity because it nurtures the human spirit, it inspires human creativity, and it promotes the spirit of enterprise. By providing a powerful system of incentives that promote thrift, hard work, efficiency, capitalism creates wealth. The main difference between capitalism and socialism is this: capitalism works. Okay, so I'm John Towers. This has been the American Sermon. Thank you very much. And I'm out of here.
Learn more at theabracast.com. Get graphic elements, notes, worksheets, and text versions of selected episodes, as well as access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing into the mailing list. Get all that, plus exclusive episodes, by supporting the show and becoming a subscriber at subscribestar.com.